The Able to Care podcast is sponsored by Able Training Support Limited, who build partnerships with organisations to develop confidence and competence in their team to promote positive outcomes for all. Find the link in the description. Hello and welcome to the Able to Care podcast. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and joining me today is a very special guest, Lucy Buxton. So Lucy has over 34 years of experience, both in the NHS and social care. Lucy spends her time supporting those working in the sector. Her knowledge as a nurse, coach, trainer of NLP and hydrotherapy. I'm going to make up a whole new thing for you there, Lucy, on top of your CV. Enables her to guide professionals through periods of change and challenge in their lives. So when she isn't working with professionals in the sector as well, she also coaches young people in her spare time. So first off, thank you so much for joining us today, Lucy. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you for asking me. It's lovely to be here.
So I think I feel like you've got quite a unique perspective. We obviously chatted a little bit before you've come on the episode today, and you've got this vast wealth of experience of working in the health and social care sector, but also I know that you've had to navigate the health and social care sector from the outside as well, as far as supporting your daughter. So you're both an expert through experience as well as a kind of an expert within the field itself. So maybe we should start with, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story and we'll kind of take it from there?
Yeah, well, interestingly so, I don't suppose it's just my daughter. I guess I started my career I've got a picture that I often share. I think I was about 3 or 4 when I first wore a nurse's uniform.
Really? Nice.
Yeah. And my mum had just been in hospital and I was doing the little, nurse, keeping her kind of well. And over the years, I've had quite a few situations where I've ended up caring for and supporting family members. So the first was my nan, who herself had been a nurse. She needed support and she ended up going into a care home, which we managed to get at the bed because I agreed to be a nurse in the home.
Oh, right. Okay. That's negotiation skills. Yeah.
So I actually nursed my own nan in the home until she passed away. And then my dad, some years back, he had a triple heart bypass that went very much wrong. And I was there. I was the one that's refusing to listen to him and got an ambulance and sent him in. And then when he was in ITU, I was the one going, what are you going to do? And, advocating for Dad when he couldn't speak. And then I nursed my mum over the last few years of her life, and specifically the last kind of 6 to 8 weeks of her life. And I'd always nursed Mum in one way or another. I'd been a carer for her when I was kind of 13, 14 and 15. And then, so then there was my daughter, who we discovered in 2018 was very poorly. We didn't know. That was at the point my mum was poorly and dying. So I had to deal with my mum poorly and dying and finding out my daughter was very poorly as well with her mental health, but actually driven by the fact that we now know that she's got ADHD, ASD, and she's got a condition called PMDD, which is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And research is starting to show that there's a link between females who have ADHD and PMDD. So I ended up having to step in and be there. And then since she was in hospital for 16 months, and then since her coming home, I've had to be, I'm her mum, but I've been her main carer for the period of time that she's been home. And she's kind of getting on with her life. For a period of time, it was me one-to-one, literally, completely there for her with no support. And it's been a challenging journey.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So it sounds, obviously, what were the kind of early signs or the challenges that your daughter had? And it sounds like, again, maybe the diagnosis has really helped to kind of clarify what was actually going on. But was there a bit of a journey getting to that, or a bit of a challenge to get to that? Or
there was a challenge to get to the diagnosis, but there wasn't a journey with regards to my experience of her being ill. She'd had a couple of panic attacks, possibly. So I got her in to see a counsellor, but she completely hidden the fact that she'd been self-harming for well over 12 months. I didn't know, didn't have a clue. She was going to school, she was doing what she needed to do. Looking back, I can look at photographs and see how visually she was changing a little bit, the colour of her skin. She was a little bit more tired looking in the pictures. So I didn't know anything. The first thing I really knew about how poorly she was. And this comes like with I guess a bit of a trigger warning for some people. I found that I just walked into a room and she'd taken an overdose.
Yeah, so it's kind of just hit you out of nowhere and that kind of immediately, as far as the kind of the self-harm side of things, where people do say it's attention-seeking behavior, well, that's straight away kind of counter to that point, isn't it? That, well, there wasn't a lot of attention-seeking going on if nobody knew that she was doing it. So that kind of myth that there is around self-harm, I think kind of, yeah, that one puts that to bed immediately, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ultimately, I guess people have their own reasons for why they self-harm. And I guess if I put my NLP hat on, people are not their behaviours. So for me, it was a rapid decline of what do I do in this situation? Nurse mode straight away. I put that hat on, and I promptly called an ambulance. Sent her off to A&E, and then I had to then discover whilst I was in A&E that she'd been self-harming, and I discovered that because they took off some of her clothing and didn't put her tights back on her so that she could have an ECG. And I looked and I went, okay, that was it. I just had to get on with it, and my world just turned upside down overnight. And then we looked to get support. And she just sat on a waiting list with no support, despite the fact that she was just getting worse and worse. And it took my mum being three days from the day she passed away, my daughter took a second overdose. So I was nursing my mum.
Yeah.
And I had to rush my daughter myself into hospital, which that time I thought, I ain't ringing an ambulance at 3 o'clock in the morning. I shoved her in the car and I took her myself.
Yeah. Probably a quicker route there, isn't it, if we're waiting that time? So it sounds like you were going through that particular period of your life was extremely challenging then, as far as, having to kind of go through the bereavement or the caring of your mum, as well as then, I suppose, this huge impact of suddenly finding out a bit of a smack in the face as far as, oh, wow, my daughter's really poorly as well. I've spoken to quite a few carers about it. Was there, as you said, in hindsight, it's easy in hindsight, isn't it? Did you ever go through a period of like feeling guilty or feeling like I should have known? Or have you always kind of been able to separate it up and going, how could I have? She was that good at hiding it.
Things that I went through. Hands up. I have massively apologised to my daughter for the things I called her that night on the way to hospital. Because I'm there knowing my mum's going to die.
Yeah.
And I was in hospital and I knew how desperately poorly she was. But I also knew I had to get to my mum's house to get her washed and changed and turned.
Yeah.
I had to choose. And I chose my mum because I knew my daughter was safe with the nurses. And I had to explain that to my daughter. That position, I don't ever want to be in again.
No.
I beat myself up, but I've been able to have numerous conversations with my daughter where she's been like, but I hid it from your mum, so how could you have known it wasn't your fault? So I've had the opportunity to have those conversations, and I've worked through all those feelings that I had. It was hard. I mean, Mum passed away and then we had a funeral.
Yeah.
And by that time, luckily, we'd got mental health support because I'd refused to take my daughter out of hospital. After the second overdose, I said, I'm not taking her. You can keep her. You get me help and I'll take her home. So we got an urgent 7-day appointment, of which she then got we got the crisis team involved. But yeah, 2 days after mum's funeral, she openly admitted she got another plan to try and end her life. And with that, I said, can't do this. I've got no support, no help, nothing. There's me, there's a brother, and my elderly father who just buried his wife.
Yeah.
And I said, can't do it, take her, put her into hospital. And we were really lucky. We got a bed within, that was the Friday afternoon, and we got her into hospital on the Tuesday.
Mm.
And she stayed in, she was in 2 hospitals. She was there for 16 months. And I had no support.
I think there's probably many people who'd listen I'd kind of really feel that's a difficult choice to make. And I'm sure it was a massively difficult choice for yourself. There's part of me that my professional head on is going 100% the right thing. That you were not in that position to be able to support yourself, support her, that your well-being bucket I usually refer to was probably a kind of, you were running low. So being able to look after her, you probably wouldn't have been able to when you were in that position, safely, appropriately for yourself and for her. But I think there's many people who would go, no, I'd keep going, I'd push it. And actually, I think people go, I don't know how you could do that to your daughter. And I kind of know, but you did the right thing for your daughter. It's 100% the right thing for both you and her. But yeah, what have you encountered people who probably have put themselves in very vulnerable positions, and probably their child or their loved one in very vulnerable positions because they weren't able to kind of go, this isn't the right choice?
I don't think whether it's consciously a thing that they're putting themselves in that position. I mean, for me, a bit more context. I was having to give her one-to-one care, literally, like arm's length one-to-one care. If we talk about it in a care, like a nurse perspective.
Clinical, yeah.
Clinical perspective. I couldn't have a shower without her being watched. I couldn't go to the toilet without her being watched. She slept in my bed. That is how bad it was. There is no other way to put it. I was just on my knees and trying to do, and I did the right thing. And know that I remember she ended up being sectioned in the end. And I wrote in the letter to the tribunal that the experience we had, how horrific it was, but I wrote that it was a necessary evil.
That's it. I think it's, so do you think your clinical experience, your healthcare experience maybe helped you to recognize that more effectively would? Because if we took it from a mental health point of view, what I'd say you were there is on enhanced observations. So if I was in a mental health environment, enhanced observations, it's either I'm doing 15-minute check or intermittent checks, or I'd be in line of sight or I'd be in arm's reach. And there's a kind of a staged kind of principle on that based on risk assessment. And the important thing within the healthcare sector, if you are on enhanced observations with a patient, then you're only doing it typically, I think the recommended maximum's about an hour and a half to 2 hours before you then get a break and switch with somebody else. So from a healthcare perspective, the professional point of view is you need a limit to how long, both for you, as far as looking after that person, the intensity of monitoring somebody in that state, but also for them, to kind of the intensity of being supervised by one person for that period of time without a change is not in anybody's best interest. And so again, from that clinical point of view, from that professional point of view, I'm like, yeah, makes complete sense, Lucy. You did exactly the right thing. So do you think your knowledge of the sector has helped inform you on that side of things?
If I hadn't have had my knowledge, I would not have got my daughter home. It's as simple as that. My knowledge, my ability to know which door to knock on, my ability to understand regulation, get my head around it, my ability to know that what was going on, the culture that we were exposed to in specifically the one hospital. The first hospital, my ability to write care plans, because they hadn't written care plans for my daughter. I said, well, give them to me and I'll write them, because I was told nurses don't have time to write care plans. Yeah. I actually wrote my daughter's phased discharge plan.
Right.
Because I hadn't done it. So I wrote one and I presented it at a discharge meeting. And I said, well, here's one. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. So why do you think, I mean, that's a very unique position that you were in to be able to do that. Why do you think, again, switching the role around a little bit from the professional point of view, why don't they have time to do that? Why aren't they doing that? You know, is it the system, or is it mentality, or what is it?
Okay, two different things for two different hospitals. The
Mm,
first one was an assessment unit. They've got kids in there that have been there for 2 years that were completely inappropriately placed. So that's a system problem.
yeah.
They got kids that were acutely unwell and weren't
Mm,
able to move through the system. They've got kids that should not have been in hospital there. Kids, you know, with
right.
ASD, ADHD was not the right place for them.
Yeah.
So that was a system thing, demand and supply,
Hmm.
pure workload.
Yeah.
So they were dealing with the urgent, important.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second hospital, that was purely down to culture, toxic
Yeah.
culture.
Right. Okay.
To which, to put it to context, my daughter came home the back end of 2019, and last year the hospital had their registration removed.
Right. Okay. So it was recognised. It was the whole culture of the whole
Well,
place. It wasn't just,
yeah,
yeah.
she went there just after they'd had an embargo lifted, and they were on a phased being able to have kids back into the hospital. And in the 9 months she was there, they had 8 ward managers. They'd only got 1 ward.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's definitely, as you say, a toxic environment that's not healthy to work in, let alone healthy to be a patient in. So yeah, 100%. Okay. So obviously, it sounds like when it came to the diagnosis of your daughter, obviously you said you recognised, and it sounds like it was quite quick to be able to get to that diagnosis of
Well, interestingly
ASC and
not.
ADHD. No.
Interestingly not, no.
Okay.
So I knew, so it was the PMDD bit first, so the premenstrual bit that I worked out first, because both her overdoses were at that vulnerable time in her cycle.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I remember being in A&E the second time and saying to the doctor, "This is really random, but what do you think?" And she said, "I think you've got a point." So while she was in hospital, I pushed that. We paid privately to go and see a consultant at a private hospital that was near to the NH hospital she first went into, who deals with supports females and women's with PMDD. And the doctor had written her up for treatment, of which there's lots of different treatments for PMDD, but what they needed to do was remove the hormonal element to be able to see what was the mental health element. So she'd been prescribed a treatment which would have put her into an early temporary menopause for her while she was on the medication. But we then hit a challenge in the fact that my daughter's condition was getting worse, and the hospital were fundamentally refusing to administer this. And we got a nurse from the private hospital that was willing to go. The hospital she was in was refusing to acknowledge PMDD as a condition. They weren't having it. By this point, I'd spoken to somebody who works a lot with universities in America and people over here, and actually was very connected with a professor who did a lot of early research around PMDD, who's no longer around. He's passed away now. And she gave me the hints of what I needed to do. So I got a period tracker, all sorts of things. I was able to predict my daughter's pattern of behaviour in hospital and the incidences, but they didn't listen. They didn't want to know. When she moved to the second hospital, I banged on about it again, and they didn't listen. They didn't want to know. And I gave them the heads up. But every single time I said, "Watch her, she's going to do something," I can tell. I knew when there'd be an incident based on her cycle, which I was tracking at home myself. I could tell remotely, I was miles away, and I knew. It was when we came home that the mental health community team, who were fabulous. They really were fabulous. And when we came home, they were really helpful. The first thing Little Un did when we took her to this appointment, there was a pack of crayons on the table. And she picked them up because they offered her them to write with. She picked them up and she looked at them and she looked at me and I went, what is it? Because she couldn't communicate to anybody at that point. And she'd look at me and I'd work out by her facial expressions. And I'm like, what is it, chick? What are you trying to tell me? And she's like, nothing. Crayons, what do you want to do with them? And I went, do you want to reorganise them? She went, so immediately I knew that the crayons weren't in the right order. And the mental health, like the CAMS team went, have you ever thought about? And Little Un sat there and she then was able to start to open up because she'd watched the other kids in hospital who got ASD, ADHD. She'd been able to work out, now actually, we're waiting on a list to have the actual diagnosis. I don't need an actual diagnosis. She's got ASD and ADHD. There's no need, it's evident. And she's got Tourette's as well. So for us, it was once she stopped masking, it was like, oh, okay.
100%. I find that with a lot of whether it be foster parents or whether it be biological parents. I get a lot when I'm teaching around courses, kind of, we're trying to get a diagnosis. We think it's this, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that why wait for the diagnosis? As soon as you kind of suspect, adjust the kind of the care package or your support package around what you think it is, because even if you get a diagnosis, one person's ASD is not the same as another person's, so you're still going to have to tailor it individualized anyway. So what's the point in waiting? I get the kind of the funding side of things sometimes, or the additional support, or sometimes I think it's getting schools or healthcare professionals to listen to that diagnosis. The same as you obviously found with the PMDD as well. It's kind of like, if it isn't written down, if it isn't put on a form, it doesn't really exist.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also the complete lack of knowledge and research, specifically because PMDD it's a female condition, right? So to get the PMDD route, we continue to carry on at home, and I was just able to see how dreadful she was for 2 weeks of the month and how she changed. She acknowledged that. And I was like, come on, chick, let's give this a go. And I spoke to a GP, and GP was like, okay, let's do this. He wrote to the hospital. The hospital came back with advice and guidance. We found a pill. We put her on it for 21 days. There's only 2 that are licensed for PMDD. The 21-day didn't work. The 7-day break, she turned into this other person again. And then we were like, no, so she takes it continually. So it was give the treatment that is needed. But what we also know is that, like you say about ASD and ADHD for people is different. Depending on where she's at, life experiences, things and stuff that are going on, depends on how her experiences of her neurodiversity and the challenges that come with that from the conditions she lives with.
100%. I know that I know a little bit about PMDD. I've had some people close to me who have managed to get the diagnosis of PMDD. I think most people probably have never heard of it. Obviously, everybody's aware of menstrual cycle and hormonal changes during that time period. But it isn't just that with PMDD. It's kind of the extreme, isn't it, as far as the hormonal imbalance or the hormonal change during that time period. And I know there's been some, I think there's been some cases in America, hasn't they, where individuals have managed to had an exemption from violent crimes due to diminished capacity based on PMDD because it affects the brain that much. And I know that a lady I was very close to had it. So it's that 2 weeks of the year, 2 weeks of the month, that just becomes a different person.
It's a different person. So it's at the point where a female would ovulate, the brain, and they don't necessarily really get it, but the changes in the hormonal balance in the body, the brain's ability to deal with that is less easy. If you think about somebody, one of the things my daughter experiences with her ASD is that she feels emotion so much more intensely. Her perception of pain is so much more, and her sensitivity to noise. So with the changes in her hormonal cycle, she can't deal with the pain. She can't deal with the noises and that kind of closing in feeling of that feeling that some women get when they're going through the cycle of overwhelm. That is for her, it's just off the scale. I mean, 1 in 75 women or girls, females, who have PMDD attempt to end their own lives. That's a frightening statistic. And it is so little known, and there's so little. There is research going on, but there's so little. But they do know it's connected to ADHD and things like Ehlers-Danlos as well, which we believe my daughter's got Ehlers-Danlos, a lower level of it, because she's hypermobile. I mean, she just clicks her fingers and bends her fingers, but I'm hypermobile.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It all fits
and it's hard
together.
to separate this up. Yeah, it does. Yeah. And obviously, I think there's starting to be growing understanding around that as well, that it's neurodivergence, as you mentioned, the Tourette's, the ADHD, the ASD, the PMDD, all of those. And obviously the PDA, ODD, the kind of the spectrum grows and grows and grows. And it is this diversity, this neurodiversity generally kind of is all interconnected and interwoven as far as, but it's the way the person has to navigate that. And I think there's so many, it's quite interesting that, has she ever had any other diagnosis put on her? Because I know that we spoke a while ago with a lady so personality disorder is a common one that gets thrown at women related to with those with ASD, for instance.
Massive. So when she was in the first hospital, there was mention of emerging emotionally unstable personality disorder.
Yeah.
But going back to my mom hat, nurse hat, I took the two in together and I went, get that out that report. She hasn't got that.
Yeah.
Not having that. So that doesn't come into the room, and we refuse to acknowledge it. She actually gets PIP payments, which she's had since she came out of hospital, and nowhere has that been used as evidence to support her, because no, she's just neurodiverse, and she lives with the challenges of numerous conditions, and she lives with the challenges based on the trauma to her neurology through the experience that she's been through.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's when people are talking about trauma, and I think neurodiversity and trauma goes so hand in hand as well, because if you do have, and it sounds like obviously your daughter does have sensory processing differences, as far as particularly around, sounds like she's quite hyper responsive or hypersensitive. And as you were talking there, you know, most people aren't aware, they only think of the 5 senses, the 5 external senses, forgetting about the internal senses, proprioception, vestibular, and then you've got your interoception.
Learn to drive a car, and she can't.
Yeah.
So we laughed about it this morning, because she's had 2 driving instructors.
Right.
The second one did 1 lesson then, and we got a text saying, my mum's just broken her hip. I'm going to reduce my hours and do less driving instruction. The little one's like, well, I suppose she caught me driving onto incoming traffic. And she can't physically change gear whilst looking that way, putting her foot on the clutch and not looking at the gear stick. So she can't steer. She can't. She has to look at the gear stick. Yeah. So it's clutch down, gear stick. Then I'll look at the road in front of me.
Which they don't like for driving. They don't. Yeah, they seem to frown on that a little bit of doing one thing at a time. But yeah, if your proprioception system isn't typical, then yeah, absolutely, your arms and legs don't just do what you think they're going to do as you want to do them.
She falls. She drops things. Interesting you say about other senses. So she might smell something, and that for her dramatic memory, which then for her is less easy because the smells trigger flashbacks for her as well through the PTSD.
Thank you for listening to the Able to Care podcast. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, comment, and share. We really appreciate all of you listeners. As you were talking about the PMDD as well, I just thought the interoception, so recognizing your own emotions. You said she's hypersensitive as far as her emotions are concerned. So a lot of people don't realize that obviously our emotions are one of our senses. So interoception is that, how do I know when I'm angry? I feel it. How do I know when I'm excited? I feel it. It's the organs telling me about my emotions. So if I'm hypersensitive to those organs, and then when you were describing there of adding in the kind of the typical difficulties and challenges of the menstrual cycle anyway, and the pain and discomfort, it's just a case of, wow, that must be an intense experience for anybody. And it's easy, isn't it, from an external point of view, when people out there talking about, or mental health is still I know stigma has reduced significantly, but if you just put it into that very physical, imagine that you are your whole body is hyper reacting to the emotions that your hormones are causing this imbalance of, as well as the physical discomfort and pain that your body typically goes through that time period. There doesn't need to be any delving deeper into mental health. Just imagine that. How would that affect your mood and your well-being and your coping strategies and stuff?
So is it the depression and the anxiety that she displayed at first, they were just a symptom of something else that was the root cause? Yet the medical model is to look at that as a condition. For her, that wasn't the condition that needed treating. It was the other thing that caused that. It was the fact that her brain just works differently. And it's the understanding her that has made the difference, and her understanding herself, which is massively key. I mean, simple things like, so every now and again, she's learned that she needs to have a break from the pill that she takes for her PMDD. So she's going to do that this weekend. So she's not in work. She's got no shifts. I'm not working for the next week because she's going to need her mum. We've planned some things in the diary which are nice. So she's got something that's going to give her a dopamine hit. We know we've got to get painkillers in. We know that she's going to be curled up in her bed. So I have to help her tidy her bedroom, because she can't be in a bedroom feeling rubbish and then overwhelmed about the state of her bedroom because of her ADHD. She can't get the motivation to tidy her bedroom.
And I think there's a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily, when you're talking about the conditions that you're referring to, obviously it sounds like your daughter is very intelligent. She's fairly high functioning. She works as well by the sounds of it and stuff. There isn't anything like...
No. She left hospital with no education whatsoever. She couldn't take any exams, nothing. So we went down the SEND route and the EHCP and all that. And the outcome from that was that they were going to put her back into an environment which they completely didn't get, was completely inappropriate. So I withdrew her just for a few months, because she was nearly 16, from state education. And we did interest-led learning. So she then last year took herself off to college, and she went one day a week to college, and she got her English GCSE and maths. And then she's been able to get a little part-time job. She's got a part-time job. She works in Asda. She loves it. And they are so incredibly supportive of her.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
But she also knows that she can't work more than, say, 16 hours a week, because she's just physically, it's too much. It's just too much. And being out in an environment, so there was an incident a few weeks ago at work where she just happened strangely to be in the wrong place at the right time, where somebody else was really struggling, and she was the only one there. She stepped in and she helped in this really traumatic situation, and she knew exactly what to do because of what she'd been through and what she'd seen in other environments she's been in, i.e. hospital. The rest of the staff team didn't know how to deal with that situation afterwards. But what that did for her was then just knock her out of kilter for 2 weeks. She couldn't deal with it because it triggered flashbacks. She didn't know then how to navigate that. Yeah. It's something that it's a daily challenge for her to live her life normally.
I think, are you fairly familiar with the kind of the spoonful of energy kind of principle? Have you ever heard that analogy before related to ASD?
No, go on.
So no, you may not have. So I use it on a few because I can use it with PDA or typically ASD and PDA are where we tend to use it. But it's basically that you have 20 spoonfuls of energy a day. And yeah, so it's kind of following that premise where, this is why routines are so important for those with ADHD, because they don't have to use as much energy if they've got a routine there, because it can go into autopilot rather than having to hyperfixate and think about the 1,000 million steps to be able to do something that we may take for granted as being simple. So it's that kind of spoonful of energy going, something out of my norm, something that requires me to be, as you gave the example there, working like highly sociable, for instance, where I can do it, but I'm masking and I'm having to use 10 times more energy than a typical person would to be able to do that. Doesn't mean I can't do it. It's going to use 5 spoonfuls of energy, whereas it might a typical person that only 1 spoonful of energy. So if we have 20 spoonfuls of energy in a day, I'm going to use those up. So working obviously requires a lot more energy, so she could do it, but then she's probably nicking spoonfuls of energy from about 3 days in advance to be able to do those 2 days. So now she's working at a deficit on the following 3 days where she's going to have to rest to be able to build up that surplus of energy again.
She goes to work, she gets on, and she masks. As soon as I pick her up at the train station, so we've got her to the point where I put her on a train and she gets off a train. She's got that routine. Don't ask her if she's not concentrating, we've had to go and pick her up 2 hours down the road. Yeah, so she's not there. That's it. We've got a problem. This whole week has been a problem because the trains aren't running by us. So she's had to have a bus.
Right.
That's a whole other level of problem. But she gets in the car. As soon as she gets in the car, she's coming across, shut the door, and that's it, a tick start.
Yeah.
Because, as she said to me the other night, she said, Mum, yes. She says, I need to say something and I don't want to hurt your feelings. Okay. So she's reframing something so that she doesn't get a negative response, so she doesn't have to deal with the rejection dysphoria that she has.
Yep.
That emotional, oh my God. Right, so she's telling me, Mom, hold yourself together when I say this. She said, have you noticed that my tics are really bad around you and my brother and my granddad? And I went, yeah, like laughter. Yeah. And she was like, why? I said, well, of course they're going to be really bad around us because we're the place where you do not have to mask. You can be you. So as soon as she gets in the car and she sees her mum, I mean, I've been driving home and I've been smacked in the face before now when her arm's gone or she kicks the car or, it's just how it is.
Yeah. I think I find masking fascinating. I think, from personal experiences and from many individuals that I've kind of worked with, I think people have this weird concept as far as masking is concerned, that if you only see the mask of somebody, so for instance, with your daughter, I'm sure there's many people who've met her who wouldn't necessarily know that she's particularly neurodivergent or struggles or anything like that. Yeah, absolutely. And I always do it from my point of view related to, there's been times in my life where I've been extremely depressed, but I've still managed to go to social situations and nobody there would have known that I'm depressed. I can't do it for long. It's hard work. Some people seem to be able to see through it no matter what because they know me well enough. So if I can't cope with being that, I would avoid those people in that circumstance. But I can only last it for a period of time. So this is where I think I sometimes encounter, whether it be schools or other environments or certain individuals, well, they seem to be okay here. They seem to be able to go here. Well, that's like somebody meeting me when I'm masking and going, well, he knows how to be happy. So he's choosing not to be. He's acting out. And it's a case of, no, I'm putting on the show. I'm masking. It's really hard work. I can't do it for long. and I then have to, disappear into, as you said, fetal position for however long afterwards. And whether it be masking for ASD, whether I've worked with, traumatized children who put on the charm offensive, where they're like so charming and polite and lovely as we perceive it. And then they know how to act, they know how to be good. Yeah, but I know how to be happy in the same respect as far as that masking is concerned. But as soon as you get to a place you feel safe, then that's when the true behaviors are going to come out. That's the point. I'm allowed to let my hair down. And I think most people are familiar with that. It feels counterintuitive, but most of us, we know we're more likely to lose our temper with our partner than we are with our colleague. Do you know what I mean? It's, you're holding it in with your colleague, but if your partner did the same thing, because you feel connected, you feel trust, it's a safe place. So you're more likely to act yourself when you're in that environment. I think people do struggle to understand that.
And I think as well, if you look at society as a whole, historically, we've been very rules driven. Follow the rules, do as you're told, kind of values, kind of thinking. And also, if you look at how the education system is set up for component labour, and fitting in the role of, well, you go to school, you get an education, then you go and get a trade and you work 9 to 5.
Yeah.
We're seeing a massive shift in people challenging that narrative. And in lots of areas, people challenging the narrative over the rules, the constructs that we have had imposed on us, whether that be around mental well-being, whether that be around well-being, whether that be around sexuality, whether that be about diversity, inclusion, whatever. People are saying these rules don't necessarily fit for the world we're seeing, and we're going to see more of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, as a generation, there's a large struggle with, I feel like I should fit in a box, but I really don't want to, and I really need to be who I am and be empowered.
Yeah.
I mean, as a mum, I massively empower both my son and my daughter, and I have done, and I've allowed them to find their own way. Little one wants to be a tattoo artist. When she was at school, before she was ill, we were thinking doctor, scientist, astronomer, all that kind of stuff. No, she wants to be a tattoo artist. She's changed her name.
Yeah.
It's her life. I have to support her as her mum. She's an arrow that I carry around. I can only point her in the right direction and hope that she will soar. And the best thing I can do is enable her to soar with all of the less easy things that she experiences on a daily basis.
Well, I suppose that kind of leads me in a little bit nicely to kind of my next question. So obviously you've now, you predominantly you've got your own coaching consultancy company. I will put the plug out there, ljbcoachconsultancy.co.uk, and we'll make sure that's in the link as well. Did you start doing, because obviously you offer coaching and consultancy services predominantly in the health and social care sector, isn't it? I believe, yeah. So whether it be management or workers of, did you start that before the experience with your daughter, or is that something that's come from seeing this dual-sided kind of nature of your situation?
Yeah. So fundamentally, when my daughter was first ill, I had a employed role, and I went off sick when everything happened, and I was then like, okay, and there was other stuff going on. And I left, and I was like, well, what do I do? And I distinctly remember sitting in my dad's lounge. It's little and had only gone into hospital a few days. It was in the August. And that's all. What are you going to do for work now, love? No, I don't know. Supposed to work for myself because no one's going to employ me. Because there was no way that I could have an employed role and do what I needed to do for my daughter. And looking back now, the fact that I've worked for myself. So when I first set up my business, I'd always wanted to go down this route of coaching. And strangely, the weekend after Mum passed away, I actually was booked on a coaching introductory weekend. And I went. Because it was what I knew my mum would want me to do it. So I sucked it up and went. Interesting. What we were just talking about hiding things. What have I just said? I sucked it up.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
I put my face on, put my lip on, and I went. So then I set my business up, but then I quickly got into the point of wanting to retrained alongside doing what I was doing, kind of nurse related stuff. And then coming up for 2 years ago now, I was doing the both. I was doing nursing and coaching and compliance. And then I just went, right, all in. So that's kind of where it's led to me now. And I ended up getting the kids element of the business because people who knew the results I was having would come in and say, do you work with young people? And I was like, well, I can. Of course I can. And it's just kind of organically happened and grown.
Yeah. So what are the main challenges that you come across sort of that, healthcare and professionals are dealing with that you find they need that support? Where are they struggling? Where do they need you?
Big one is just overwhelm. Just too much stuff. They're burnt out. A lot of fear. Lost. A need to get away from this thing that keeps me awake at night. And they're torn by, don't think I can do this anymore. Don't think I can be part of this anymore. This thing that I loved, that I still love, but it really is like keeping me awake at night and making me ill and really not good. So it's how that then impacts their behaviours and either not performing or walking away from a job or negativity in the workplace. Far more, I would say, far more experience and evidence of those social boundaries, things spilling out over those. You said about you can fall out with your partner at home, but you might not do it at work. That's the sort of stuff I'm seeing more of because people are just they're just carrying so much stuff. And a lot of that, I guess, is the pressures of the sector, the pressures of the role, the stuff, the hangover from the pandemic. So they've gone through that, lots of adrenaline keeping them going. Then they get to the end of it and they're like, there was a lot of people that just went and left the sectors. But then there was those that have stayed on but haven't sought any help or support. And they've just kept going. And then they've got to that point where now they just can't.
So it sounds like a lot of it is kind of, again, the sort of supporting on the self-care side of things is a big part of it then. But it also sounds like it's very, I don't know, there's an element, there was something you said there that kind of reminded me almost of an abusive relationship in so much as I really love what I do, but it's causing me harm. And it's kind of helping them to kind of navigate that relationship with their job, their role, which is to kind of go, well, then if you still love it, then you need to work at it, but you've got to start being more boundaried and you've got to lay down these rules of going, you can't do this to me anymore. But now we're talking about a job role rather than a person. I suppose that's an element itself, isn't it?
So interesting you say that because I literally was having that conversation yesterday with a business I'm supporting. And I was saying about how the business needs to really empower the team and have really clear boundaries with the people that come externally into the building. They'd had something happen that was less positive, and a normal, natural, healthy boundary had been stepped over by somebody that comes into the workplace, but not employed. And I was like, you as an employer, you really need to step up here and say, that is not acceptable, and we're not having our team exposed to that. You need to empower them to know you've got their back, rather than stood there going, what do? We daren't stand up to them because they'll complain.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think there's something's going to give, something's going to have to change at some point. So as we kind of draw a close, I think there's two sides. There really is two sides to your kind of story and your experiences and stuff. So I'm going to kind of try and draw out the two sides. Okay, so first off, as a parent, what would you say is probably if you have, or I suppose an unpaid caregiver, whether it be a parent or whether you are, because you've also had the experience obviously with your nan and your dad and your was it your granddad? Sorry, who had the heart
My
problem?
dad. It was my
Your
dad,
dad, yeah,
my nan and my
and
mum.
you. And your mum as well, and then your daughter. So you've got this huge wealth of experience of being the unpaid caregiver. So would you say, what are the biggest tips that you would give somebody else related to being an unpaid caregiver of a child or of a parent?
Put you first.
It's good. Always good to hear. Yeah.
Simple. I took myself off to a counsellor. Little went into hospital. September, I turned up at this lady's house and I sat there and she said, "How can you help me?" So I sat there and I went, "Bleh." Literally.
Yeah.
And I went there every week to Claire's house for 9 months. She passed me a cup of coffee. The cat would sit on my lap and I'd go, "What?" And it'd all come out. I'd drink my coffee, I'd wipe my tears up, I'd get up and walk out the door and I'd carry on. And that's how I got through.
Yeah.
Because I knew that I was the most important person in my world. And if I didn't look after me, I was no way I could advocate for those around me. I couldn't support my dad. I couldn't be a mum to my son. Then that was a completely different dynamic I had to have, where I was trying to protect him from what was going on with his sister and just continue life as this new normal. And then I had to really massively protect and advocate for my daughter, who was miles away and who legally had been placed in a hospital against her will.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, massively put yourself first.
I can almost hear though, and like you just gave one example there of obviously going to your therapy and stuff like that, and making sure you had once a week where you had that hour to kind of offload, talk about, to be listened to unconditionally, to not be judged and stuff like that, which is where therapy really comes into play, and having that external professional that's willing to listen. But I can almost hear the narrative going, well, that's nice if you got the time. And that's what I hear so often. I'm sure you encounter it as well, that time excuse sometimes as far as being the...
So this is interesting. Yeah. Therapy is different to coaching.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I put my coach hat on, for me, if somebody engages in coaching, they need to make that time. And if they don't make that time, they're not a client. Because they're not making the commitment to themselves to go on the journey of growth forward. Now, that might sound harsh, but that's where coaching is different to therapy.
But what about from the person who says, I don't have time to do that hour? Do you find there's ways of kind of overcoming that, as far as, so if you have had clients or anything that said, oh, I'm struggling to find the time to do this self-care thing that you're talking about, do you just say, okay, that's down to you, you're going to have to, and lay the boundaries, or is there tips that you give them or anything that kind of helps them to overcome that time excuse?
It's interesting. It depends if they are open to finding the time. So if it's just that I haven't got time, I can't do this, I haven't got time, and they really are not going to look for the time, then they actually don't want to find the time. So the change that they need to make is too big for them. So whether that's they're not ready, whether it's that they think that they've got all this stuff that they've got to get done, whether it's that if I make the time, moving to that next place is scary, whatever reason, right? If somebody says to me, I haven't got time, and I say, well, what about this? Could you try it this way? And they go, don't think it'll work, but I'll give it a go. They're showing me that they're committing to this. So simple example, recently with a client, they were like, supervisions. How do I get them all done? Got so many, I'm behind already. I've got so many booked in next month where I'm going to lose all this time. Okay. So we talked about different options for how you can do supervisions. And actually, by the time I saw them 2 weeks later, they'd done all the ones they got booked in May at the beginning of April, because fundamentally they approached it from a different perspective. If we put our head in the problem, we're not likely to see the options and the opportunities to do things differently.
I suppose as an element, and I know this is maybe a little bit dipping into the NLP side of things, but it's the self-limiting or the limiting self-talk, isn't it? The I don't have time or I can't afford it, rather than the how can I afford it and how can I find time? And just that little shift of mental vocabulary can kind of shift that focus over. Yeah.
If
100%.
you believe you don't have time, you absolutely won't
You're right.
have time.
Yeah.
You won't find time because you're not open to finding time.
Do you think this is a bit of a subtext that happens within the culture, particularly within the professional sphere of health and social care, where there is a narrative, isn't there, of kind of we have no time? Do you think that culturally kind of seeps through, which means that maybe there is, but they're not prioritizing right, they're not time managing correctly and prioritizing right, so they're feeling overwhelmed because it's not that they don't have the time, it's just they haven't managed to, they're focusing on the time they don't have. I know that's a controversial thing, and I'm sure...
No, I'm going to be controversial. This is my opinion and I'm owning it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people across the sector that are looking for a mystical unicorn to fix. It's not coming.
Yep.
Don't tell them it's not coming. So the point is, whilst I sit there and think this is all a mess, it's not good, woe is me, it's terrible. Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. I get your reality. Yeah. What if you were to try and find another way? So this is where people are so driven by fear. They fear the inspector calling. I saw a post yesterday on social media, the inspector calls. My goodness, my heart started going up a beat or two. So when we are driven by fear, where we get emails that say, I need it now, you will do, whatever, then fundamentally, the narrative in our head is going to change. And if we don't know how to, or we don't feel empowered, or we don't feel supported, or when we're not in a physical or mental well enough place to be able to put those boundaries in and say, I completely understand that you need this now, and I am unable to achieve that. I will get it to you by...
It's the managing expectations side of things, isn't it? I often tell my staff is that, don't burn yourself out trying to get back to every inquiry and every customer. Sometimes you just send them an email saying, we've received, we're on it, we'll get back to you tomorrow. I said, because sometimes it's just no information causes the distress and agitation. They want to feel in control. So they're saying, I want it now. They don't need it now. They're just trying to control it. So if you just give them some feedback to go, it'll be by this time, then you're still managing that kind of need. And I think that's very much time management, productivity management and stuff like that, which is I think one of the challenges, it's a skill. It's a skill that has to be learned. And I don't know where teaches it unless the employer or the setting or a coach or something like that is actually going to go through. It's not something you learn at school. Nobody does time management, productivity management at school classes. There should be one, I don't need to learn maths till I'm 18, but I could probably do with learning some time management, productivity management, couldn't I?
Definitely. But it's not a thing that would have been taught in education because it's not needed for component labour that follow the rules, go to work 9 to 5, do as they're told. So if you think about social care and the fact that it is very much rule driven, and the fact that the difference is when people can have a growth mindset, be empowered to be able to look at something without fear of reprisal and then go, this is what's happened. Okay, let's deal with it. Let's look at what we're doing rather than, oh my goodness me, I've got an investigation to do. It's terrible. I can't do it. Then they're getting stuck. They're procrastinating. They're overwhelmed because fundamentally the brain is fearful over what's happening in that and what might happen based on that and who might say, what about that?
There's some fascinating directions to go down. I think you mentioned the growth mindset there, which I think is so fundamental that people should be, ingrained with and encountering and stuff. So yeah, recommendation for any of you listening or watching is to go out and do a bit of research on growth mindset because it's shifting that, I can't to how can I, and looking at like failures as stepping stones to learning rather than kind of failures, so to speak.
Yeah,
so it's constantly looking for growth and stuff.
Go one step further. There's no such thing as failure. It's just feedback.
Yeah. 100%. Failure only happens if you stop.
Take your head out of the problem.
Yes, beautiful, Lucy. Thank you so much. So, I think there's we could explore a few different topics, and maybe we'll have a chat again one time and kind of explore some of the other bits and pieces. But hopefully, those who've been listening or watching has found some bits that you've gone through, especially your personal experience and that personal insight, really, really valuable. And it does sound like they really complemented each other as far as maybe the situations you've gone through personally have helped inform your practice as far as the consultancy and the healthcare side, as well as the healthcare side's then informed your ability to be able to cope with those very difficult personal situations. So, yeah, it sounds like
interesting you say that. I wouldn't be making the impact on lives that I make if I had not have gone through what I went through. And I remember Claire, the counsellor, saying to me that she felt that I was creating at that time a touchstone from where I would give differently. Maybe,
I like that.
And I guess it depends on your perspective, but I kind of feel I finally found what my sole purpose is. Who knows?
Yeah. You had to go through that hardship to find it or discover that skill, that talent. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful point to kind of end the session. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today.